special picture of the two, which I thought was quite sweet.
This is the first time that the two of us have ever spoken about her as a mother.
Believe it or not, you and I are both in this photograph.
On the morning of April 14th, 2026, Prince William walked into King Charles's study at Highgrove and laid down a red leather folder. Inside sat a commercial contract, signed by Camilla's daughter, Laura Lopes. It laid out a plan to turn Princess Diana's private archive into a multi-million-pound luxury venture. Charles read the signature twice, looked up at his heir, and spoke 5 cold words. Get her on the phone now. The midnight file that changed everything. The phone call arrived at Kensington Palace on the evening of April 2nd, 2026. It came from a senior trustee connected to the Spencer family estate, a man who had managed private archives for over 30 years. He asked to speak directly to Prince William, skipping standard secretarial staff entirely. He held a legal query from an international law firm representing Leapes and Heritage Partners Limited. The firm wanted to conduct a formal valuation of 34 personal letters and 6 evening gowns worn by Princess Diana. The trustee knew her sons had granted no such clearance. William demanded the full file sent to his residence by courier that night. When the package arrived, it contained 4 pages of financial projections and an unsigned non-disclosure agreement. The paperwork outlined a plan to bundle Diana's personal items into an exclusive traveling exhibition across 3 overseas cities. It projected an immediate revenue target of £8 million. The agreement listed Laura Lopes, the daughter of Queen Camilla, as a managing director and key shareholder. It claimed the project had implicit approval from senior members of the royal household. The discovery exposed a quiet commercial operation that had been building momentum since late 2025. Laura, an established fine art curator in London, had cultivated deep ties with high-net-worth cultural investors. Her company had been registered discreetly without palace announcement or public filings. The business model relied on taking historic royal assets and placing them inside private ticketed venues. Patrons would pay £500 per person for private viewings, gourmet dining, and exclusive access. The pitch deck explicitly used Diana's name and image as the primary cultural anchor. William spent 48 hours verifying every document with his legal team. They traced the corporate registration back to a registered address in Mayfair. They discovered that 3 separate archival valuation requests had already been submitted to gallery directors across the capital. None of these requests had passed through the Privy Purse Office or the Crown Estate. The files made it clear that contracts were nearing completion. With initial sponsor payments scheduled for late spring, William ordered his staff to halt all communications with the trustees involved while he compiled a master dossier. The issue was not simply about money or art curating. It struck at a strict legal boundary established in 1997 following Diana's death. Her personal estate, including clothing, correspondence, and portrait rights, was protected under explicit legal covenants. These covenants ensured that her memory would never be used for personal profit or corporate branding. Any public display required direct authorization from her children and her brother, Earl Spencer. Laura's proposed venture bypassed those legal protections entirely by framing the event as a private educational foundation. By the morning of April 10th, William had established a complete timeline of how the plan came together. Laura had held 3 private dinners at a contemporary art gallery in central London during the winter months. Her guests included representatives from a UAE-based luxury investment consortium and 2 prominent British art dealers. Attendance records confirmed that senior aides from Camilla's private office had also been present at 2 of those gatherings. That detail changed the entire nature of the investigation. It suggested that people inside the palace were actively assisting the project. William knew he could not handle this through standard palace channels. Sending emails or scheduling formal committee meetings would alert the parties involved and allow them to pull back quietly. He chose to gather every paper trail, contract draft, and corporate filing into a single leather folder. He made no advance calls to his father's staff at Highgrove House. Instead, he arranged a private drive to Gloucestershire on the morning of April 14th. He intended to put the evidence directly into his father's hands before anyone else could intervene. When William stepped onto the grounds at Highgrove, he carried proof that extended beyond simple commercial ambition. He held emails showing that Laura's team was already drafting promotional brochures. The The materials used official royal crests alongside private photographs of Diana from the early 1980s. The text claimed the exhibition had the full backing of the modern monarchy, describing it as a bridge between past and present royal women. It was a bold attempt to commercialize an inheritance that did not belong to them. The drive from London had given William time to consider the broader stakes. This was not just a disagreement over gallery rights or family boundaries. If these contracts were signed, the story would inevitably leak to the public. The press would frame it as Camilla's family, capitalizing on the memory of the woman she had replaced. The reputation of the monarchy, already tested by years of internal conflict, would take another massive hit. The integrity of the Spencer family covenants hung in the balance, and William was determined to shut the operation down completely. He walked past the security gates and entered the main house without announcing his arrival to the broader household. He asked the duty footman to inform the king that he needed 20 minutes in private. There were no advisors present, no press secretaries waiting in the hallway, and no warning sent to Camilla's office. William entered the study, closed the heavy door behind him, and laid the file flat on the mahogany desk. The investigation was over, and the confrontation inside Highgrove was about to begin. The quiet meetings, behind closed gallery doors. The private dining room at Mount Street Restaurant was booked under a false corporate alias on November 14th, 2025. 6 people sat around an oval mahogany table on the top floor of the Mayfair venue. Laura Lopez sat at the head of the table next to a managing partner from a Dubai equity fund. On the table lay 3 sample leather-bound portfolios containing high-resolution photographs of archival royal dresses. The waiters were dismissed after serving drinks, and the heavy double doors remained locked for over 2 hours. The financial proposal discussed at that dinner was ambitious. The investors were asked to put up £12 million to launch a global traveling exhibition titled The People's Heritage. The pitch relied entirely on gaining exclusive display rights to 5 iconic dresses worn by Princess Diana in the 1990s. In return, the investment group was promised 40% of all ticket revenue and gift shop sales. Laura assured the investors that her curatorial background would guarantee access to private collections that standard museum curators could never reach. To make the deal work, Laura needed more than just dresses. She needed personal provenance. Her corporate team drafted a list of 30 additional items held in private storage vaults near Windsor. The list included handwritten thank you notes, private photograph albums, and personal sketches drawn by Diana. The pitch deck claimed these items would be displayed alongside contemporary British art pieces curated by Laura's own agency. This combination was framed as a fresh cultural bridge between 2 distinct eras of royal history. The business model targeted an ultra-wealthy demographic. Tickets for the general public were capped at a limited number, while VIP packages were priced at £700. These VIP passes included private evening tours, champagne receptions, and access to an exclusive lecture series hosted by guest historians. The financial projections showed the entire investment would be recovered within 18 months of the initial tour launch. The first stop on the planned circuit was scheduled for Abu Dhabi in late 2026. Tension began to surface inside the gallery network, long before Prince William saw the file. In early January 2026, Laura's representatives approached an independent textile conservator based in Bath. They asked her to inspect 2 silk evening gowns held in a private estate collection and provide a commercial transport clearance. The conservator asked for the official clearance papers from the Royal Archives at Windsor Castle. Laura's agent claimed those papers were being processed directly through the Clarence House private secretary and would arrive later. The conservator grew suspicious when no paperwork arrived after 3 weeks. She checked with her professional network and learned that 2 other specialists in Oxfordshire had received similar requests. Both had been asked to sign strict non-disclosure agreements before inspecting any items connected to the Spencer family estate. The conservator made a phone call to a colleague at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. That single phone call started a quiet ripple through the museum community that eventually reached royal advisors. The mystery deepened when staff at Kensington Palace noticed subtle changes in internal inventory logs. In mid-February 2026, an administrative clerk flagged 3 file requests regarding the long-term storage location of Diana's ceremonial wardrobe. The requests had been submitted using an internal clearance code assigned to a former royal household liaison. When the clerk tried to verify the request with the chief archivist, she was told the query had been marked as confidential. The file was pulled from the public register entirely. William's team solved that mystery within hours of opening their investigation. They discovered that the former liaison had left royal service 8 months earlier and was now on the payroll of Laura's art advisory firm. The former staff member had used old administrative credentials to access location codes for the storage vaults. This allowed Laura's team to identify exactly which items were held in private trusts, rather than public museum collections. They targeted assets that sat in legal gray areas where ownership was split between multiple trustees. The legal strategy behind Laura's plan was surprisingly clever. Her lawyers created a secondary non-profit entity called the Heritage Foundation Trust. By routing the exhibition rights through a non-profit entity, they could claim the project served an educational purpose. This structure allowed them to apply for international cultural tax exemptions while still paying massive management fees to Laura's commercial firm. The commercial firm took a 30% management fee off the top before any profits reached the charity. By late March 2026, the venture was moving at dangerous speed. Contracts had been drafted for venue leases in Dubai, New York, and Tokyo. Promotional videos were being produced using archival news footage acquired from private media libraries. A public relations firm in Soho had already been retained to manage the international press launch planned for June. Everything was positioned to present the project as a done deal before King Charles or Prince William ever heard a word about it. The plan relied on one critical assumption: that no one inside the palace would challenge a project connected to Queen Camilla's daughter. Laura's team believed that if the exhibition was presented as a high-end cultural tribute, senior royals would simply give tacit approval rather than create a public family dispute. They assumed the involvement of Camilla's inner circle would provide enough political coverage to silence any internal questions. That assumption proved to be a fatal miscalculation. When William reviewed the Mayfair dinner receipts and the draft venue leases, he recognized the immediate threat. This was not a harmless art project or a charity tribute. It was a sophisticated commercial operation designed to monetize his mother's memory using her personal belongings. The involvement of offshore investors and private management fees made it impossible to ignore. William closed the dossier, made a note of every name involved, and prepared to present the entire timeline directly to the king. The curator who refused to sign. On March 28, 2026, a senior archivist walked out of the Kensington Palace State Apartments, carrying a heavy blue box. Inside were 3 decades of restoration records, climate logs, and physical transfer receipts for the royal clothing collection. She walked straight to the office of the Privy Purse and placed her keys on the desk. She submitted her formal letter of resignation, effective immediately. Attached to the letter was a printed copy of an internal memo she had received 48 hours earlier. The memo had come directly from a senior administrator linked to Clarence House. It requested the immediate temporary transfer of 3 iconic dresses to a private studio in Chelsea. The destination was listed as a specialized cleaning facility. The archivist checked the registered vendor list and found no record of the studio. She called the facility directly and discovered it was a private photography space booked under Laura's corporate firm. The archivist realized the dresses were being prepped for promotional photo shoots. The archivist refused to sign the release forms without written permission from the Prince of Wales. She knew that any movement of those specific items required joint authorization under the 1997 legal covenants. Pressure was applied from above within hours. An official from the household told her the transfer was a routine loan for a private royal heritage project. She was informed that questioning the clearance could compromise her career within the royal household. Instead of complying, she gathered her personal belongings and walked out. Before leaving the grounds, the archivist made a private call to Princess Kate's senior private secretary. She left a detailed message outlining the exact crate numbers, the requested transfer dates, and the name of the administrator who signed the memo. That phone call gave William's team the missing link they needed. Until that moment, they knew a commercial entity existed, but they lacked hard proof that palace staff was actively trying to remove items from secured physical vaults. Kate acted quickly to secure the remaining physical archives. On April 1st, 2026, she arranged a meeting with the legal team representing the Spencer estate at Althorpe. They conducted a complete audit of all items currently on loan to public institutions across the United Kingdom. The audit revealed that 2 other display requests had been submitted to regional galleries in Yorkshire and Edinburgh. Both requests claimed to have central clearance from London, but neither possessed signed approval from the estate trustees. The legal team discovered a secondary contract draft hidden inside the loan applications. The language allowed the loaning authority to sub-license the items to third-party commercial venues overseas. This meant that once the dresses left the security of the public museum network, they could be legally transferred into private exhibitions without triggering an immediate legal breach. It was a loophole engineered to exploit ambiguities in old estate agreements drafted nearly 30 years ago. A new mystery emerged during the inventory check at the Windsor vaults. 3 handwritten journals from 1985 were listed as out for restoration on the main digital tracking system. However, the physical restoration log showed no record of the books leaving the climate-controlled room. The digital entry had been updated manually on February 10, 2026, using a master administrative key. The archivist who owned that key had retired 2 years earlier and now lived in France. William's security team resolved the mystery by auditing the remote access logs of the Palace server network. They traced the login location to a commercial IP address registered in Belgravia. The address belonged to a corporate PR agency hired by Laura's team to write the exhibition guidebook. Someone inside the palace had shared master administrative credentials with an outside marketing firm. This allowed external writers to view private journal entries and transcribe excerpts for promotional video scripts. The discovery sent shockwaves through the immediate household staff. Passing digital access to outside corporate entities breached basic security protocols surrounding royal archives. The information contained in those journals included private family schedules, personal reflections, and unreleased photographs from private estate holidays. Marketing drafts recovered from the agency server showed plans to publish selected quotes in high-end exhibition catalogs sold at the planned Abu Dhabi launch. Kate personally contacted Earl Spencer to inform him of the security breach. The Spencer family reacted with immediate legal warnings. They issued a formal notice to the royal household solicitors, stating that any attempt to move or publish private family correspondence would result in an immediate high court injunction. The threat of public legal action between the king's family and the Spencer estate created an explosive political situation that required immediate intervention at the highest level. By April 12, 2026, the entire paper trail was complete. William possessed the signed resignation letter from the Kensington archivist, the unauthorized transfer memos, the remote server access logs, and the formal legal warnings from the Spencer family. Every piece of evidence pointed toward a coordinated effort to commercialize protected royal assets for private financial gain. The window for quiet internal diplomacy had closed. William scheduled his drive to Highgrove for 2 days later. He instructed his staff to prepare a complete physical dossier with no digital copies left on shared palace servers. He wanted absolute control over the narrative when he presented the facts to the king. The archivist's refusal to sign a single release form had unraveled a multi-million-pound commercial venture, and her detailed record-keeping provided the exact evidence needed to force a final confrontation. Confrontation at Highgrove. The clock on the mantelpiece in the Highgrove Library struck 11 on April 14, 2026. King Charles sat in a green armchair near the window with an unlit pipe in his hand. Prince William stood by the side table, unzipping a dark leather briefcase. He took out 3 distinct stacks of paper, each clipped with a heavy metal fastener. He laid the first stack on the low table between them, right next to the king's spectacles. The first document Charles picked up was a corporate registration certificate for Lopez and Heritage Partners Limited. His eyes scanned down to the list of named officers until he reached the signature line. Below it was a draft contract assigning global image rights for 5 ceremonial dresses. Charles put on his reading glasses and read the third paragraph line by line. The contract offered an upfront advance payment of £2 million upon delivery of the physical artifacts to a private warehouse in Middlesex. William did not sit down. He pointed to the blue ink stamp on the bottom left corner of the second page. That stamp belonged to the private administrative office at Clarence House. It proved that an internal seal had been applied to a commercial document without royal clearance. Charles turned the page over, looking for a secondary authorization mark from the Chancery. There was none. The paperwork had bypassed the formal oversight committee entirely. The king set the paper down and picked up the second bundle. This was a collection of printed email chains stretching back to December 2025. The messages detailed meetings held between gallery managers, corporate sponsors, and senior household staff. One email chain stood out clearly. It contained a direct instruction from a senior staff member telling a curator to bypass standard conservation checks. The email claimed the king was aware of the project and supported its commercial aims. Charles tapped his hand on the arm of his chair and asked a direct question about who had authorized the use of his name. William handed him a copy of an internal memo dated February 16, 2026. The memo bore the initials of a senior personal assistant assigned to Queen Camilla. The assistant had written that the project had full informal approval from the highest level of the household. It instructed staff to treat all logistical requests regarding the Diana items as urgent and confidential. The king stared at the initials for a long time without speaking. The facts were plain and documented. A commercial venture was operating from inside his own home using royal authority to sign third-party deals. If these contracts became public, the legal backlash from the Spencer estate would be immediate and brutal. More than that, it exposed a complete breakdown of administrative discipline inside his personal office. A secondary question remained unanswered. How had a private company managed to obtain the internal tracking numbers for the Windsor vaults without triggering a security alert? Charles turned to the third stack of documents expecting to find simple negligence. Instead, he found a printed server log from the Privy Purse office. The log showed that an administrative account had been accessed 24 times over 6 weeks from an off-site location. William explained the technical trail. The account belonged to a former deputy treasurer who had retired to Cornwall 18 months earlier. The credentials had never been deactivated by the IT department at Buckingham Palace. Someone inside the household had pulled those active credentials from an internal file and handed them to Laura's corporate legal team. This allowed external advisors to check inventory lists without leaving a digital footprint on current staff logs. Charles took a red fountain pen from his pocket and drew a thick cross over the front page of the draft agreement. He wrote 4 words in the margin: "Cancel this project immediately." He then picked up his desk phone and dialed his private secretary at St. James's Palace. He instructed him to freeze all external access codes across the entire household network before noon. He ordered a complete audit of every commercial inquiry received by the estate over the last 6 months. The tension in the library shifted from administrative shock to personal reality. Charles knew this was not an isolated mistake by an overzealous art advisor. Laura was his stepdaughter, and her company had operated with the silent help of staff paid by the crown. When Camilla returned from her morning engagement in Tetbury, she would walk into a house that was legally compromised and deeply divided. William laid one final sheet of paper on the table before packing his briefcase. It was a draft statement prepared by his own legal team at Kensington Palace. The statement gave a clear ultimatum. If the commercial entity was not formally dissolved within 48 hours, William would file a public notice with the High Court to protect the Spencer Trust assets. He made it clear that his loyalty lay with protecting his mother's legacy, regardless of the fallout inside the family. Charles looked at his son, then down at the red ink on the contract. He knew William was not bluffing. The legal documents were solid, the paper trail was clear, and the threat of a public lawsuit was real. The king closed the folder, stood up from his chair, and walked toward the hallway. He told his footman to inform Queen Camilla that he would meet her in the small drawing room the moment her car arrived. The uncomfortable dinner table. The silver phone on the side table in the small drawing room rang at 8:30 in the evening on April 14th. Queen Camilla picked up the receiver while King Charles stood near the fireplace holding the open dossier. Prince William sat opposite them with his notebook open on his knee. Charles motioned for his wife to press the speaker button so everyone in the room could hear. Laura's voice came through clearly from her house in Wiltshire. Charles did not offer a greeting. He read out the registration number of Laura's corporate entity and asked her to explain why her signature appeared on an international licensing deal. Laura attempted to frame the agreement as a preliminary draft intended to secure funding for a legitimate educational foundation. She insisted that her art firm was merely acting as an unpaid consultant to help preserve historical royal garments. She claimed the £8 million figure was a speculative projection created by third-party financial advisors. William spoke up immediately, pointing to page 12 of the dossier. He read out a specific clause that guaranteed Laura's company a 30% annual management fee from all ticket and merchandise sales. He asked her why private investors in the Middle East had been promised exclusive access to personal letters written by his mother. Laura paused on the line before answering that those letters were part of a separate private collection offered by an independent seller in Gloucester. The statement was an outright falsehood, and William knew it. He pulled a signed affidavit from an archivist at the Bodleian Library in Oxford. The affidavit confirmed that the 34 letters in question were currently stored in a restricted vault under royal control. They had never been put up for private sale or transferred to an independent seller. Laura's team had used forged provenance papers to convince international investors that they owned display rights to the material. The room fell into silence as Charles realized the depth of the deception. The operation was not just an ambitious business pitch. It involved falsified documentation created to secure international investment funds under the royal name. Charles told Laura that she had 11 minutes to explain who had assisted her inside the palace administration. If she refused to give names, he would hand the entire legal file over to the Metropolitan Police Special Inquiries Unit by morning. Laura admitted that 2 former staff members from Clarence House had helped draft the proposal during the autumn of 2025. She claimed they had assured her that informal approvals were routinely granted for cultural projects involving royal history. She insisted that her mother did not know the financial details or the specific items listed in the agreement. Laura argued that she was being targeted simply because she was trying to build a modern art enterprise outside the traditional family structure. Camilla spoke for the first time, asking William if a private resolution could be reached without destroying her daughter's professional reputation. She suggested calling a private meeting with Earl Spencer to explain the misunderstanding and withdraw the disputed items quietly. William rejected the suggestion on the spot. He pointed out that 3 international contracts had already been signed, and initial deposit funds were sitting in an escrow account in London. The financial structure created an immediate legal liability for the Crown. If Laura's firm broke the contracts unilaterally, the overseas investors could file a multi-million-pound breach of contract lawsuit in the High Court. That lawsuit would force all internal communications, internal emails, and financial logs into open court. The public would see that staff paid by the taxpayer had helped a private family member attempt to monetize Princess Diana's memory. Charles took the phone from the table and brought it closer to his face. He told Laura that her company must be dissolved before 5 o'clock on April 15, 2026. He ordered her to return all advance deposit funds to the investment group in Abu Dhabi, immediately using her firm's own capital. He warned her that if a single document from the file appeared in the press, he would issue an official public statement disavowing her commercial activities entirely. Laura agreed to the terms and hung up the phone. The confrontation on the line was over, but the structural damage inside Highgrove remained unresolved. Camilla argued that the ultimatum was overly harsh and would bankrupt her daughter's private gallery business. Charles refused to debate the decision. He walked over to his desk, picked up his pen, and drafted a formal directive to the royal solicitors at Farrer & Co. The mystery of who had provided the forged provenance papers remained open. William knew that an art curator in Wiltshire could not forge official palace archival stamps on her own. Someone with expert knowledge of royal estate law and deep access to historical records had structured those documents. The paper trail pointed toward a senior legal consultant who had retired from the Duchy of Lancaster office 2 years earlier. William closed his notebook and stood up from the chair. He told his father that he would personally oversee the dissolution process with the royal solicitors the following morning. He made it clear that he would not leave Highgrove until he saw the signed dissolution papers delivered by hand. The family dinner that evening was canceled, and staff were instructed to clear the drawing room as the household prepared for a long night of legal negotiations. The paper trail in Mayfair. A courier arrived at the offices of Farrer & Co. on Lincoln's Inn Fields at 9 in the morning on April 15, 2026. he delivered a sealed leather pouch containing the corporate dissolution filings for Lopes and Heritage Partners Limited. Inside were signed bank transfer receipts proving that £2 million had been returned to the investment fund in Abu Dhabi. Prince William sat inside the partner conference room on the second floor, watching the managing director verify each signature against official registry records. The legal dissolution ended the commercial threat, but the financial settlement left a massive paper trail. To return the advance deposit without declaring corporate bankruptcy, Laura's firm had to sell 2 private commercial leases in Mayfair. Her art advisory agency had to take out an emergency loan secured against private real estate in Wiltshire. The transaction was completed quietly without public court filings or press announcements. However, the sudden movement of funds alerted compliance officers at the Bank of England. By mid-afternoon, the royal solicitors had secured written confirmations from every foreign investor involved in the project. The contracts were officially voided, and all promotional materials were ordered destroyed. The non-disclosure agreements signed by museum contractors in Bath and Oxfordshire were replaced with strict, binding gag orders issued directly by the Crown. Anyone who discussed the attempted exhibition risked immediate civil prosecution under national security privacy laws. The speed of the legal shutdown prevented a public disaster, but a critical question remained unanswered inside the palace. The forged provenance papers used to trick international investors required specialized administrative knowledge. Someone had copied official archival seals from the Chancery that had not been used in public documents since 1997. William's legal team knew that an outside art dealer could not have accessed those physical steel stamps without help from an insider. The mystery was solved when internal investigators audited the security logs at the Duchy of Lancaster office in central London. They discovered that a retired legal consultant had visited the physical document vaults 3 times during December 2025. The consultant had used an expired visitor pass issued by a staff member in the Clarence House private secretary's office. Security footage showed the consultant photographing historical estate seals inside the restricted basement archive. The consultant admitted under legal questioning that he had been hired by Laura's firm to draft the corporate pitch deck. He believed the project had informal backing from senior household officials and was told the seals were needed for historical authentication. He handed over digital memory drives containing all draft contracts, email chains, and financial notes. The physical steel stamps were immediately moved to a high-security vault at Windsor Castle under the direct control of the chief archivist. With the insider identified and the files secured, William turned his attention to long-term protection. On April 20th, 2026, he met with Earl Spencer at Kensington Palace to draft a new binding covenant. The agreement placed all personal items, correspondence, and portrait rights connected to Princess Diana under a joint trust, managed equally by both families. No item can ever be loaned, displayed, or catalogued without unanimous written consent from William, Harry, and the Spencer estate trustees. The new covenant created an impenetrable legal shield around the late princess's legacy. It removed all administrative ambiguity and prevented any future commercial exploitation by outside entities or non-royal family members. The files were locked away, the corporate entity was wiped from the public register, and the palace quieted down. However, the deep structural rift created between William and Camilla's family during those tense April days remained permanently carved into the modern monarchy. The attempt to commercialize Princess Diana's memory ended quietly behind closed legal doors, but the rift inside the royal family remains. By enforcing the Spencer family covenants and locking down the royal archives, Prince William drew a clear line around his mother's legacy. The structural boundaries of the modern monarchy were tested, and the rules governing personal royal assets have been rewritten forever.